Puss in Boots is a dead man walking. Well, technically, he's a dead feline walking, but you get what I mean. The cat's out of the bag. Shrek 5 is a thing, and I think this will be the saddest one yet. Probably because of the reason I'm about to expand on in just a second. It might mark the end of the beginning. A beginning that might bring about the impending doom of DreamWorks as we know it. Let me explain.
The Big Dipper.
Alright, so at the end of Puss in Boots The Last Wish, the titular character comes to terms with his mortality. He decided to be selfless for once and said he'll actually value his life this time. He had the option to make his dreams come true and extend his life, or choose not to be a selfish prick and value the rest of it instead. At the very end of the film, he tells his friends that he's going to visit a face that's very familiar to us. That friend is Shrek. We all know this. Now, of course, nobody can tell you how this entire narrative is going to unfold. This is DreamWorks after all. And one thing about DreamWorks is that they're professional milkers. And when it comes to their stories, anything is possible. Like for crying out loud, Donkey managed to get a dragon pregnant. I'm actually surprised there's even a Shrek 5. At least Pixar took like a decade plus to make a sequel to The Incredibles, and we all know how that went. But that's besides the point. The standalone film, The Last Wish, perfectly set up the final chapter of Puss's life. Unless for some bizarre reason, DreamWorks decides to prolong his life with the hopes to milk his story arc. But I think that will undo the entire point of The Last Wish. If they end up butchering his entire character and storyline, I wouldn't be surprised though. Shrek has basically gone from a depressed raging ogre to a dad who's on the path of enlightenment and stoicism, so anything could happen at this point. However, I don't think DreamWorks introduced death for no reason. This big bad wolf was terrorizing Puss like nobody's business. That was done for a reason. I think there's two paths that are the most plausible regarding the outcome for Puss. One, by the end of the next film, Puss will end up in a situation so devastating that it puts him in a scenario where his life is on the line. The situation will be so dire that he ends up dying, or somehow through the powers that be, he ends up surviving. Or number two, he just straight up dies. Considering what's happened in Shrek, the previously mentioned aren't out of the ordinary. I think it's pretty obvious where the Shrek franchise is headed. Eventually and inevitably, Shrek will most probably have to return to the castle and be king. Either that, or there's going to be some huge drama with King Arthur. Or maybe some old villain from the past will probably return, like what they did with Kung Fu Panda 4. I'm just interested to see how the side characters in this film are going to end up moving past the entire Puss situation. There's probably going to be someone in the comments mad as fuck saying Puss in Boots isn't dying. Bro, death basically told him it's inevitable. That's the entire point of death as a character. He's a constant reminder that nobody lives forever. The only reason why death let Puss live is because he noticed that he learned the most important lesson of life, to value it. If death wanted his head, or trust me, he could have had it. Every Shrek film has some theme. The first one explored the theme of identity. That was the entire point of us being introduced to this somewhat depressed ogre that lives in a swamp and does nothing but shelter away from society and is grumpy all the time. The second installment to the franchise is all about acceptance. Fiona's parents have to deal with Shrek and the fact that he's this huge green goblin of a creature. He's not a Prince Charming, he's not even human, but to Fiona, he isn't so shabby. And you know what they say, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, or something cliche like that. The third one in the trilogy is all about destiny. They have to find a new king and they happen to run into Arthur, who's a loser with daddy issues, but he eventually stops being one and ends up reigning supreme over the land far, far away. There is a fourth film, but we don't talk about that. That was all about grief and regret. The reason why I'm not really interested in bringing it up is because that film was kinda poorly executed, and in all honesty, I don't even see why it was made. It seemed like a cash grab to me. Personally, I think Shrek 5 will basically reset the entire franchise. Not in a literal sense, but it probably will mark the beginning of a new era. You know how DreamWorks is, they don't know when to stop, especially if something is raking in dead presidents, and you can't blame them, why would they? It's one of the biggest IPs DreamWorks has, so it'll be interesting to see how they continue the story going forward. It's been more than 2 decades since the very first Shrek film, and some of you are even married now, and some of you are even on the verge of divorce, but that's none of my business. That just shows how long it's been, and of course DreamWorks is baiting us with nostalgia, and trust me, it's definitely going to work. So tell me in the comments what you think is going to happen to Puss, and when the movie comes out, maybe I'll swallow my words, or maybe I'll be right. Guess only time will tell.